started. Okay, Deanna, I couldn't hear a thing you said, so we were trying to figure out how to take care of that, but anyway. Okay, good morning. My name is Gwen Takes Horse, and I am Choctaw and Chickasaw and a genealogist in the membership department. My talk today is looking for Laurie's exclusive Choctaw princess. So let me move that there. Okay, so this is my granddaughter, and she was 4 years old at this time. She likes, just like any little girl, she likes to play Barbies, she likes to play Disney princesses and stuff like that. Can you hear me?
Oh, I just can't see your PowerPoint.
Oh, well, wait a minute. That's what I forgot. Because I couldn't hear what Deanna was saying either.
Okay, go.
Maybe I turned it the wrong way.
Okay, this should be good.
Okay. And I need to change a couple of things real quick. Okay, anyway, going back to my granddaughter, Laurie, she is a Choctaw member. She's also Chickasaw, Crow, Chippewa, and Hidatsa. And we always tell her she's a princess. Well, she's always been a little princess, but anyway, and she acts like it sometimes. But so one day I was forced to play Barbies or maybe some of the Disney princesses, and she asked me if she was a Choctaw princess, because she knows she's Choctaw, and she knows she's Chickasaw and all the others. She also has dances at powwows, so she knows enough about the Indian, our 5 tribes cultures. Anyway, so she was asked if how she had become a Choctaw princess, because she didn't know if she had any princesses in her past. So I decided to kind of do a little bit of genealogy with her to show her or have her look for a Choctaw princess in her ancestors. Okay, here's her family tree. Her name is Ruth, and her dad, Vincent, is non-Indian, and this is my daughter, Tana. So showing you this little tree, and the next presenter will be showing you how to make a family tree. So I'm going to skip through some of this really quickly. But anyway, Tana is born in 83, me 54. So I explained to Laurie that if you're looking for an ancestor on the Dawes Roll, and I explained what the Dawes Roll was to her, that we had to go back to 1900. So we go to my mother. Well, she was born in 1928, and then go to her parents. And the reason I picked this side is Ruth James was actually her maiden name, and she married my dad, and his name was Cecil James. But his James was Chickasaw, whereas my mom's James was Choctaw. So they're not any kin, so that wasn't going to be weird or anything. So anyway, going to Ruth James's parents, and in particular her grandmother, Tilly Antigonus, she is at the right age to be on the Dawes Roll. The Dawes Roll was done between 1898 to 1906, and they had to be living in southeastern Oklahoma during that time. So right now we're going to focus more on Tillian. Just a really short history lesson. The Choctaws today in Oklahoma originally were in the lands in Mississippi, and this shows several of the cessions that we had to give to the government for whatever reason. And then eventually that darker section, that was when our last one, that was with the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, that we lost that. So in 1880, the Indian Removal Act, which was signed by President Andrew Jackson, and that gave him the authority to negotiate with tribes in the southeastern part of the country for their removal to federal lands west of the Mississippi River. So for the Choctaw tribe, their removal was in exchange for their homelands in Mississippi and extreme western Alabama. And originally, we had the larger section that they moved us to in southeastern Indian Territory. Okay, here was the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek. And you can just read that. That was the one that where we ceded our lands east of the Mississippi River, and then the government gave us land west of the Mississippi River. The Choctaws had an option to stay in Mississippi rather than to go to Indian Territory, but if they chose to stay, they became citizens of the state of Mississippi and under their laws. So in case some of those that stayed wanted to go ahead and come on over to Indian Territory at a later date, they could. And because they put in Article 14 in that says that each Choctaw head of a family being desirous to remain and become a citizen of the United States shall be permitted to do so by signifying his intention to the agent within 6 months from the ratification of the treaty. So what they were supposed to do was they were supposed to sign in with an Indian agent, and he would give them a scrip for land. So that way they could come over later if they want to, and some did. Some came over around 1850. Okay, this is the first time the Indians are enumerated with the Armstrong Roll. Basically, only the head of household was listed by the name, and it generally was by their Indian name. So if you don't know your ancestors' Indian name back then, there's not a book that we have in a genealogy department that has Indian name to their white name or their new names. This is just a copy of, in this case, it has the third one that's, let's see, 3-6 down on the names is my ancestors. And it just talks about their land and if it was good land, poor land, had water running on it, etc. Okay, then it gets time for the immigration rolls that have who came on over to Indian Territory. Excuse me a second. Again, most of them are by their Indian name, but some of them, it had their age at the time, and it actually told the family with them, and told how tall they were and whether they were male or female. And it looks like they were kind of short when I look through some of them. Okay, here is the removal routes. The one down here where at the bottom where the Mississippi, when they came over around 1903, Mississippi Choctaws, and I'll go over that in just a little bit later. Okay, when they arrived here, they were eventually put in 3 districts. You can see where, and if I say these names different than you've heard it, I'm sorry, and I see that the Holittoblichit district, it was up here, up toward the top, then the Pushmataha district and the Atoksvli district. These were probably, when they first got here, they kind of moved up into different areas, but this is basically the same thing as the Choctaw Nation is today, the same group of counties that they had. Right now there's 10.5 counties after 1907. Here are some of the rolls that you might find some Indians on. The 1855 are your ancestors. The 1855 Cooper Roll, the 1855 Payment Roll, the 1885 Choctaw Tribal Census, and that is online. The 1893 Choctaw Payment. And at times when they were trying to, after everyone had signed the the census card, or it was their application, sometimes the commission checked back on that 1893 lease district payment to see if their names were there. Okay, so for the Dawes Commission, the Dawes Act was signed into law in 1887. This gave the President of the United States the authority to have tribal land surveyed and divided into allotments for individual tribal members. Okay, at that time, it did not include the 5 civilized tribes because of their treaties. The Dawes Commission was created to attempt to persuade the 5 tribes to agree to allotment plans. That was in 1893. In 1896, they started on the Dawes Roll, or so they thought. There was people signing up that weren't Choctaw. They heard free land, and everybody was out to get a share of it. So at some point, and at that's when they decided, let's stop it, we'll start again. So in 1898, the Curtis Act was signed, and then that's when they started taking oh, by the way, they did get rid of, they just dropped the 1896. So if somebody was on there, that didn't mean that they were on the 1898 when they started taking the Dawes Roll, because they had to reapply. If they didn't reapply, they're not on there. Okay, so the final rolls of the citizens and freedmen, the 5 civilized tribes in Indian Territory were the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole. It was commonly called the Dawes Roll, and for these people, it was not just a given that they were on that roll. They actually had to apply by filling out a card that listed the members of their household. They had to be living in Indian Territory with their tribe between 1898 to 1906 to be eligible to apply. And for Choctaws, they still had to be alive by September the 25th, 1902. The only people born after that, that were put on the Dawes Roll after that date, were the babies or the small children. And so in March the 4th, 1906, that's when the roll ended. So this is just an example of a census card. They would go in and somebody would fill out their application for them, took their names. In this case, it gives John Tickness as the head of household. It said that he was 52 years old, that he was male, he was full blood, and it shows who his father is, but it doesn't show his parents' name, or his mother's name, sorry. That could be because she was deceased and they didn't talk about deceased people as much. It could be he didn't know her name, except maybe it was Mama and that was it. He may have died, he may have been a child when she died. Anyway, this is my, Tillian Tickness, the third one down, is my grandmother, or was my grandmother. And the Mississippi Choctaws, some of them came over around 1902, 1903, and some of the Dawes Commission went back over to Mississippi to see if any of them wanted to come. So they eventually, you can see where this person, his name was Jim Sam, he was living in Lee County, and his post office was at Carthage, Mississippi. This was their original card that they had to fill out. So at one point, after they had given, evidence or if they were Indian or not, and in this case, because he was full blood and because he probably spoke fluent Choctaw, then he probably didn't have much trouble. Some of the others that had trouble is the ones that didn't stick with the tribe, and maybe they'd been living in Texas, and they had not married another Indian, and so by the time of the Dawes Roll, they had light hair, blue eyes. Now, some did get in, but most did not. And this is the actual card that says that, because they had to come over here and live 3 years and work the land, and it says that he did that, And I'm sorry this is hard to read, because it's just, that's the way it is on the microfilm. But unfortunately for him, he died, so apparently if he had any kids, then I'm sure that they got his allotment. So the Choctaw records that we have is the 1830 Armstrong Roll, the 1831, 32, 33 immigration rolls, the 1855, where the Choctaws were paid by the Chickasaws for the land that the Choctaws let the Chickasaws live on, because when the Chickasaws came over here, they didn't have a place to go, and so the Choctaws let them have some of their land to live on. And so they lived out farther west than the Choctaw Nation. Okay, the 1885 Choctaw Census, we have that. The 1893 Choctaw Payment, we have that. We have the ones that applied in 1896, and then in 1898 we have copies of the Dawes Roll and their individual family cards. So to obtain a CDID, you must have a direct ancestor on the final Dawes Roll of citizens and freedmen of the Choctaw Civilized Nations in Indian Territory. This is commonly called the Dawes Roll. Your direct ancestor must have applied and be enrolled with the blood quantum. This was the basis for the official identification of the degrees of Indian blood for the 5 tribes. So for the Choctaw in Oklahoma to be eligible for the Dawes Roll, your direct ancestor, and that means a parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, and so on. It does not mean an aunt, uncle, or a cousin. And they had to be living with the tribe between 1898 to 1906. However, anybody could be living in Indian Territory without being a member of the tribe. At the time of the 1900 federal census, there was probably 3 times more non-Indians than Indians living here. So if your ancestor died before September 25th, 1902, or after, if they were born after March the 4th, 1906, they will not be on the Dawes Roll. If they were living in Arkansas, Texas, anywhere else but southeastern Oklahoma, they will not be on the Dawes Roll. Birth and death certificates are used to prove to be a descendant of an original enrollee. Okay. Like again, this is my grandparents, great-grandparents, John and Lizzie Tickness, and my grandmother, Tillian. And the sad part about this story is, in about 3 years, her brother and sister had died, and Tillian is the only one that was left of her immediate family. So, going back to Laurie, we went back to the Dawes Roll. She did not have an Indian princess or a Choctaw princess, but I told her that's okay, that she did have loving great-grandparents that, and this is on my mom's side, I like to play around in newspapers.com sometimes, and with a name like Tillian Tickness, it is not an everyday name, so sometimes I can find out articles on her. And so this was in the Wichita, Kansas newspaper that was on July the 4th, 1916. And it was talking about my grandparents being married. So back to Laurie. So Laurie, you're still our princess. But she had a great aunt who was Miss Indian Oklahoma in 1982, and her name was Sharon Ruth James. Laurie's mother was Miss Indian Oklahoma in 2005, and so she unfortunately was wearing the crow outfit that we took a picture of her with. And that's it kind of in a nutshell. Let me get this out. Our genealogy department assists potential tribal members to search for their original enrollees on the Dawes Roll. To prove Choctaw heritage with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, you must be a descendant of someone listed as Choctaw or Mississippi Choctaw with the blood quantum on the Dawes Roll. To be eligible to apply for the Dawes Roll, your direct ancestor had to be living in southeastern Oklahoma between 1898 to 1906 with the tribe, and they had to have a blood quantum. So that is the end of my talk. If there's any questions or answers, we can, I can try to answer them.
Well, this is great. Thank you, Gwen. This has been a pleasure to watch, and I've learned a whole lot. And I was really excited to see how you wove the story of your your granddaughter through that, and talking about, her grandmother and then your parents and all the way back and sharing that history with her. And I think that that's, one of the places I think I find myself sometimes stuck is when you get to Mississippi, and not realizing that you would have to have known a different name than what maybe have ended up on the Dawes rolls. And so that's sometimes confusing. So thanks for clearing that up. I don't see any questions right now, but feel free to drop your questions in the chat for Gwen. I do have just one question to kind of follow up about your process. So how does somebody, I guess, get started? Do they call you? Do they have to fill out a form? What is the process if they want to get your services in your department?
Okay, she wanted to know what? Okay, I think the answer is genealogy request form. I can barely hear you. Is that it?
Yes. How did they access services with the genealogy department? Is that what you?
Yes, that's what I was asking. Mm-hmm.
Okay, here comes our technical help. Turned it all the way up and down.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
We're still trying to. We've done that. Oh, I know.
Joe.
We're going to blame Joseph on
This
that.
is Joe's fault. Okay, so here's your question.
Okay. Okay. So how does somebody get services? What's the step?
Okay, to become a Choctaw tribal member, they have to have, again, a direct ancestor on the Dawes roll. They had to have a blood quantum, and they had to have been living in southeastern Oklahoma. So the first step is to start with yourself and work backwards in time. And so you would, like with Laurie, we started with her and went to her parents, her grandparents, until we got back to 1900 to see if there was somebody on the Dawes roll. So in her case, she had 4 great-grandparents, or they've had great-great-grandparents on the Dawes roll. And luckily, they were still alive when I was little or young, and so they always told me stories about being Choctaw and Chickasaw, and they could prove it because they were on the Dawes roll. Then, if someone needs help finding their ancestors, they could fill out a genealogy request form, and we could help them. But they have to try to get us back to their family between 1898 to 1906, and it generally helps to have a date of birth or a year of birth anyway. Sometimes they don't have a year of birth, they just have a date of death, and we can work with that too. Does that answer the question?
It sure does.
Good. Okay.
I do have another. What about the individuals that are trying to search for their family history, but they're adopted? Are there resources in the state of Oklahoma that they could potentially be referred to outside of the nation? Or if they don't have a lot of information about the birthdays or the death days, maybe there's a person that they can't quite match up with. Where are some referral services that they can go and get the assistance they need before they reach your office?
If they were adopted, am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Somebody said that I was muted. I went, what? Okay. For like an adoption, they would need their biological parents' information. they can't have been adopted by a Choctaw family and use them to obtain CDIB card. So they would have to at least go to the county that they were adopted out of, to the courthouse, and see if they can get that information there. Sometimes it's a hard fight. There's been some that have gotten a lawyer and finally got where they were able to see their original birth certificate, because they have to have that. That's one of the things, and that's why a direct ancestor is just an ancestor. I say direct, trying to explain that a little, but an ancestor is your parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, and on up, whereas your aunt and uncle and cousins are just relatives. So you can't use them. And also, when they apply, they have to provide original long-form birth certificates and death certificates to apply for the membership in CDIB. And I'm not sure what that ding was.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Probably an email.
Probably an email.
If anyone ever has any questions, just genealogy@choctawnation.com, and send us an email, and we will help what we can. Also, genealogy is spelled GENEALOGY, because some people make that an O instead of an A, and we don't get it.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you, Gwen. Thank you so much for taking the time out on Saturday to come and join us today. I really learned a lot, and I know that everybody watching will too. I think we'll move on to Gloria now. So if you guys want to swap, you guys can turn your camera off and get settled. So while we're transitioning, I don't know if you can see behind me, but this is the poster for the new documentary that's just been launched. You can see that on Heritage Day at the district. The times for that showing are 6 and 7. You can reach out to the Heritage Day programming coordinator at heritageday.choctawnation.com. And get some information about getting tickets. There's a limited capacity for tickets for each showing. We're trying to keep it socially distanced as best we can. So we're using the new auditorium there at the district. So it's going to be great viewing experience. The producers and the director will be there on site to answer any questions. It will also be shown here at the Cultural Center in the auditorium. And so there's scheduling different programming times for that. We're hoping that in the month of November that we will be able to launch it on YouTube. And so those of you who are not residing here in Oklahoma will be able to have a chance to view it. So please be patient with us, but we hope you enjoy it. As they're getting settled, our next participant is Gloria. She's also from the genealogy department, and she will be talking about family trees. I had a chance to visit with her before the program started, and she's a very dedicated researcher as well. I'm very interested in family history. So if you have any questions that come to mind about creating a family tree or any other questions for Gwen, just please feel free to drop those in the chat.
Okay. This should work now. Go ahead and take your card. Okay. This should work.
All right.
Go ahead and get started.
Sleeping.
Without further ado, this is Maria Ortega.
Hello, my name is Laurie Ortega, and I'm a research genealogy specialist with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And today I want to take some time to present to you how to start a family tree. Go to the next slide on here.
Oh, just scroll down.
Oops. Okay. This is my family right here. This is a picture of my family. So I'm going to start off with this. That person in the middle is my great-grandmother, Lonnie Mae Morris. The person that's down to the left-hand side is me and my grandmother. The upper top part is my mother, me, and my daughter. And then if you go to the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of my other daughter, Santana. So I kind of put this collage together because I was just doing the family genealogy, and I was wondering, I wonder if we have any family resemblance. So it's one of my favorite pictures that I did put together of my family. I never got to meet my great-grandmother, but for one of her daughters, she passed away probably about 3 years ago. My grandmother's sister, which was Eva Lou, she sent me a book probably back in my 20s, so probably about 10 years ago. She knew I was the person that was really interested in all the family genealogy and things like that. Well, I had heard that our family was in some of the books, but I didn't know exactly what book. So anyway, she mailed me this book, and it's Choctaw Heritage by a cousin, Betty Jean Ward Poland, and it has a lot of family information in there. It has what clan we're from, which is the Bochito clan. It has my grandmother's, Lucy, Phil, Moore, Tubby, all kinds of information. But anyways, the reason why I'm sharing this book with you is because this is what got me started into genealogy today, and I love it. And it's one of my passions, and I found so much about my family that I'm just really proud about my Choctaw heritage and everything that I have found. Okay, so we're going to start off with the next slide. And this is, what is a family tree? So a family tree is a visual description of a person's lineage that allows one to be able to trace relationships to a common ancestor. The tree-like structure is initiated as a diagram starting with one person as their root, and then it proceeds to go outwards to show the connection of each individual ancestor. Each individual branch presents a different ancestor, which shows a little history on them that may include such things as birth dates, death dates, and marriage dates. The family tree may be formatted in a print version or an electronic version. Okay, why create a family tree? To gain visual insight into who you are and where you come from, and that's very important to know who you are. It gives you an interconnection to your heritage. It is a good exercise for learning your family history in correlation to historical events. It is a good way to preserve family stories and your heritage. And I think that's one of the very most important things, to know who you are, where you come from. Know who are these people, because there's so many ancestors that you have. And if you were to put your family tree together, all these people made you. So I like knowing the events and the stories. And like I said, I'm the one that does all the genealogy in the family. So they can come to me, they ask questions, I tell them what I found. And to me, it's just so fascinating and interesting how these people lived back then. Here's the next step. So collecting information on your family. So when you're collecting information and you want to start your family tree, you're going to gather information on your family. You're going to write down all the information that you already know. Talk to any living family members and ask them what they may know, because like the elders in your family, they could have stories and stuff that they know in times, or they might know areas that maybe your family moved, so they could tell you what, county they lived in, what town they lived in, about the town, and stuff like that. That information will help you build your tree, because then you'll have a starting point and you'll know where to look. So ask your relatives about your family history. Ask for mementos and stories. Look through photo albums, family records like birth certificates, letters, diaries, and even newspaper clippings. Email or call any of your distant relatives and ask for access to any information that your family members may have. Locate family memoirs. Locate family mementos, heirlooms, and many families, those who have come before you have recorded family history information or have learned family traditions. In some cases, an heirloom is in the form of a printed book or a memoir that includes genealogy data. Other times, family records can be accessed through the family Bible. And that is true. I mean, you will find, that's why I say ask the elders in your family, because they're more likely to have a lot of the information, and they could have it in a family Bible. And that's going to help you by collecting that information so you can start building your tree and know what areas to actually look in. Other times, family records, access to the family Bible. Oh, newspaper clippings, like newspaper.com. You can start punching in your family's surname or like your great-grandparents' names. You never know what's going to come up. They did have papers that were way back in maybe 1880s, I've seen some really old. I think I have seen some in the 1850s where actually I got to punch in one of my third, fourth great-grandfather's names, and a bunch of information started popping up. So that's one of the things I suggest is newspaper.com, or a lot of people in their photo albums, they might put some kind of historical event on their family, and you might find a newspaper clipping in there. Or even on the back of photo albums. Sometimes those will give you dates, they'll give you names, a little bit of information that you can collect, write down, and use that to start building your family tree. These resources will help you to find your own family's historical recordings or events. Okay, this is one of our brochures, so I can't point to that and say that's my family because it's not. But I was like, that's a lovely family. I might be able to say that and get away with it. But anyways, okay, so sources of information. You'll find this brochure on our website. We are on the ChoctawNation.com. Under Tribal Services, you will see membership. And then second to the last, you're going to see our genealogy link, and you're going to see our page. And when you open it up, you're going to see brochures like this in there. It's going to give you all kinds of detailed information where you can go and you know where to look to start pulling some of these records to start building your family tree. So sources of information can come from various documents, which may include birth certificates, marriage license, death certificates, divorce degrees, newspaper clippings, diaries, and letters. Check out the county courthouse for records on marriages, divorces, deeds, and wills, probate. Cemetery records are also sometimes useful. A great place to find cemetery information, birth and death, dates on headstones. Yeah, I mean, if you know where your family's buried, for instance, I found that part of my Choctaw family actually came from Howe, located in Poto, which is a smaller town. And I started looking up where their grave sites were. Well, I found them in that town. I don't know how I found it because I don't know that area at all, but I just ran into it and I found their 1800 cemetery, which was really cool. And it had names, birth dates, all kinds of stuff. And then I found out a little later that they had like a church there. They had a trading post, and it's right by a creek named Morris Creek. Well, that's my family's name, and that was the land that they owned. There is another family that does own the cemetery and the land at this time, but they did allow me to go back there and see everything, which I really enjoyed that, and I just thought it was just so cool and so neat to actually see something like that from those times, because you got to think this is like 1850s, so it's very rare to stumble. I mean, you will find older cemeteries, but to find your family cemetery, that's too cool. So the next thing to do is research online sources. Classify each record by what type it is. Look for birth or death certificates, marriage certificates, and census records. Think about how each type of record is going to help you with your research. Research various sources online to gather information. Often online services can offer family history and ancestry resources. Various sites like Ancestry.com, which that's one of my favorite sites to use, I'll tell you that right now. And Family Search is another website that you can use, and you can start a free tree, and you can pull pretty good information from that. But I prefer Ancestry because I think it's easier. I can pull the information better, and I'm more, I've used that for so many years. So Family Search can assist you in creating a tree and gathering historical records. Okay, so here's another brochure I wanted to show you guys, because this is the information that you can pull from just going to our genealogy website. All these links right here that you'll see on the right-hand side, like that's your Family Search, U.S. Gen Web, Oklahoma Historical Society. Sometimes they have records that we might not have on your family if you're looking for like an individual. Oklahoma State Vital Records Index, Cindy's List, Ruth's Web, Find a Grave, which if you don't know where your ancestors are buried, that is a very good site to use, because you can punch in someone's name, it'll kind of give you the area and everything, and then you might get a hit where it is your family. And that's a good way to locate where they're buried at. U.S. National Archives, that's going to be one where you can pull dolls records from, government records. And what else do we have on here? Library of Congress, historical records. You might find some stuff on there. It depends on, a lot of the times it does depend on, at the time, if your family was maybe had to do with something with the council or the government or did certain stuff, you might be able to pull some stuff up from those records. General Land Office records, Alabama Indian Affairs, and the Indian Pioneer Papers. Oh, I love that site because I have actually pulled up some of my grandfathers on there too. Chronicles of Oklahoma, Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and Access Genealogy. All these websites are going to be very important websites to use in building your family tree. And you can also access stories. You might be able to run into stories of your family, which, I mean, if you can find stuff from back in the 1800s on your family, like 1850s, I think that's pretty neat. So we have historical resources. Like I said, the National Archives is an excellent resource to utilize to help develop personal genealogies. U.S. Census data can be found on the websites that include the National Archives, Ancestry.com, or Family Search. You can also access public records at your local courthouse or library. Dawes Census Cards, enrollment jackets. Enrollment jackets are basically when you pull up the Dawes Census Cards, which has your family on there, they'll usually have an enrollment jacket with it, or it's called an application packet. Well, that's the interview process that they did in order to fill out the census cards. Some of them had to prove that they were Choctaw, so they would give them interviews because there was a lot of other people that were signing up for the land that was not Choctaw. So that's why the Dawes Commission did that. So these are excellent places to pull records, and military records can be found on Fold 3. Okay, so here's another brochure I listed, research resources. And like I said, they have put so much information, and like this shows local counties, like genealogy places you can go to, which if your family, like my family's from Poteau, LaFleur area, so I haven't been to the Poteau Valley Genealogy Society, but I would love to go because I'm sure they have a ton of information more on the families in that area. So you have Atoka County, Bryan County, even the University of Oklahoma, you might be able to pull more information there on your family. Okay, so when you do your tree, of course, you're going to have a format selection. When you have gathered all the sources needed to build your family tree, then you will want to look at the best ways to present your family tree. The format you will use might depend on how far back you wish to go and what kind of information you would like to include. When starting your family tree, you may want to use a simple 5-generation format. Many 5-generation family tree structures are great for starting a family tree because you will have room to add some more information as needed. This format will allow you to reach a good enough length to present some of your family history. After going back 5 generations, information might be harder to research because the data might be limited in correlation to some of the era and the times that it was recorded in. And that's very true because the farther you go back on the census to even look for people, you can pull up Choctaws on the 1885 census, but as you go further and further back, there's a few rolls, like my family's on the Cooper rolls, but a lot of the names were in Choctaw, and there's really, I wish there was something where they wrote down the Choctaw names and the English names, because sometimes they used both. Like in my family, Lucy, and then her last name was Fillmore Tubby, so they kind of used both, so I could figure out which family members were on some of those rolls, and I know they're on the Cooper rolls, but it gets harder and harder to figure things out like that because they did not record a lot of stuff when you go further back in time and start researching that. Okay, so when you do set up your family tree, if you decide you want to make a print format, a printed family tree in some cases might be something you might want to use because it builds a better reference point than an online document. Using a printed version will allow you to create a family tree on paper where you can add family mementos or even some art. So in this next example, this is just a template. If you did want to do something more on paper, I'm not the best artist, so me personally, if I wanted to do it on paper, I would go search for templates and then start filling in that way. But I'd rather use the electronic version because that's just my preference. But if you wanted to display something in your house, you could do something like this and then add an art, which would create a really neat project, you know, and give a little bit more information, like if people came over, or you could give it as a gift to your family or who knows, you could do a lot with that. The electronic version. However, if you need to send your family tree to many relatives, like for instance, I'm on Ancestry. When I started setting up my tree, I wanted my family members, if they were interested, I would allow them to be a guest and come in and look at the tree, and it would show them some of the information that I had down because a lot of them didn't know. So it says, however, if you need to send, yeah, I already went over that. You may want to choose an electronic option, which is, like I said, I rather do the electronic, but it just depends on which one you want to do. Create a detailed tree by using a website or software like Excel, which will allow you the freedom to easily make notations and changes. Okay, so this, for instance, this is like a snip of my family tree, and this is what it's going to look like on Ancestry. And see, I've branched out way farther than 5 generations, but I was just lucky enough to know more information because my family wrote a lot of this information that I have down in that book. And then when I started researching, I did research and gather more stuff. But this is what Ancestry looks like. So when you invite someone in, if you want to invite a family member in to see your page, they'll be able to see all that. They can click on each one, but I don't think they can edit it or anything, but they can still review it. And they can also somehow, I think when they create theirs, connect to yours through which person that they're related to. Okay, so when you are creating that tree, you're still going to want to create like a draft. Start with a rough draft of what you already know about your family. In whatever format you've chosen, a rough draft will help you determine how much information you can fit. Having a basic structure in place can also help you find more of the missing pieces in your genealogy and help to organize your family tree. Your draft will inform you of how complex your current format can be. If you want to include more details than you have space for, you may need to restructure your family tree's format. In your draft, start to create a legend to reference. For example, brackets going from 1 box to 2 boxes typically indicate the parents of the previous box. Note this method for connecting family members somewhere in your tree. Also make sure that you are using birth names in your draft, and that's very important. If it's a female, I usually tell people, because a lot of people, to even see if they're on the dolls rolls, I will tell them I'm going to start tracking your family and tracing them. But I need the women's maiden and married names. And because on the dolls rolls too, they put, some of them went just by their maiden name, or they could be on there with their married name. And then that way, that helps me when I do start tracking them throughout the census. I can start pulling up their family and knowing what state they're coming in from. So it's very important to have the maiden names for the women, but it's also important to also have, if she got married twice, you might want both of those names so you know what to track your family under. So it says your dad's, for example, if your mom took your dad's last name when the two married, don't use your last name, use your mom's maiden name. Create a chart for gaps. This is another thing you're going to do. If there's missing information on birthdays, death dates, stuff like that, you're going to want to create a chart for gaps. With the information that you have compiled, start building your tree. Note the resources that you're using as you go along and add different information. Once you have filled out your tree with information that you've gathered, go over the information. Make sure there is no information missing at the time. So, I mean, you can estimate on a birth date until you start researching more, but you're going to want to try to find exact dates. And if not, you can always put to the side, this is the potential date, and then figure it out as you go along with your research, which one is more correct. Create a chart to know any missing information you may have come across to later fill in. You can do this in a chart you've already created or make a new one if it's easier, but you should make notes of what information you are still missing. Did I skip that other one? I don't know. Once you have filled out your tree, the information that you have gathered, go over the information, make sure there is no information missing at the time. So yeah, we already talked about that one. Make detailed notes of what you still need. Perhaps you couldn't find any information on who your great-grandmother married, or you still don't know when your grandfather came to this country. So if you're researching another side of the family, because we usually know that most Choctaws come from Mississippi to Oklahoma, so that wouldn't go for Choctaws, but like if you had another side of the family, then you might not know. They could have came international, you know, they could have came from another country. So when you're all done with all this and you've collected everything that you can, then you can start by creating your tree. Compile all the information that you have gathered, because now you're ready to put everything together and create your family tree. Oops, jumping ahead, this thing. Okay, and then once you have compiled all that information and you're starting to create your family tree and everything's all finished, you need to share this information because it's very important. And you may be the only one in the family that does start the family history and genealogy, and it's very important to pass down. So at least, like I'm probably one of the only kids that was very interested in this stuff. And I probably drove my grandmother crazy because I used to ask her all kinds of questions. Like, where did they come from? Or where did your mother come from? Because they didn't get to meet my great-grandmother. And I would have loved to meet her, but she passed away, I think, like in her 60s. So, but I always ask tons of questions. I always wanted to know everything. I call my 90-year-old grandmother all the time. We talk about how she went through the Great Depression. We talk about a lot. She tells me so much that, you know, I will know who my family is and how to pass that down to my children and then the children after that. And then hopefully there'll be one granddaughter that's like me that will share this information too, the family historian person or family genealogist. So share your information, show your family tree now that you have planted your tree roots. Print off that family tree or create a website to publish your family tree so that you may share it. Presenting your tree to others will offer collaboration to help other family members within their research, and that's true. So if you have another cousin or somebody that's interested, they're doing genealogy and they're stuck, well, you might have the information that they need to fill in that missing link. So, and then you can also share different family stories that you know with them that they might have more to add to your tree, and then they might have different stories you never even heard of. So it's very definitely want to get that information out there and share, and just keep it in your family so you know who you are, you know where you come from. To me, that's a very important. And this is another picture of Laurie Mae, which is in that book I showed you. She's on, this is Laurie Mae Morris. She's on the right-hand side. That's my great-grandmother. The middle one, I've asked my grandma this before, but there was two brothers. I don't know if that's Orrin Morris or Samuel Fowler Morris. I can't say that right. And then I think that's one of the little sisters, and Mildred Corrine. She passed away when she was younger, so I didn't know much about her. But I would find these old pictures that my grandmother has all these, and I would ask her, I'd be like, what black and white pictures do you have? And I'd be like, okay, I want that one, and she would just give them to me. and I would collect them. But anyways, now that we're finished, if you have questions, we'll be happy to answer those for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, you did an amazing job. I don't have any questions. Just have a few comments. I think it's really important what you said about that collaborative nature of family history and genealogy research, because, you know, you're absolutely right. There might have been a younger sibling in a family, or even an older sibling, in the case of my family, where they were able to get all this information. And so the younger generations come along and they don't have that. And so, you know, you might run into a cousin or a family member at either a reunion or some of these websites where you can do collaborative work. And so I think that's really important that you brought that out. I also like that you pointed out that sometimes it just takes one person in a family to gather up all of those. I think sometimes we take for granted that it's going to be, oh yeah, we'll always be here, we'll always have these stories. And so, but it is important to get it all together. And I think that sometimes I guess, you know, the organization is scary. So that would be my question that first of all for you is, how do you organize all this material? We have the family tree and we're doing our research. Do you put them in file folders? Do you start a, you know, kind of a list on your computer where you scan them all in? How do you organize the materials or suggest to us to do that? Oh,
because you can save all those documents. You can't hear me?
Okay, now I can. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. But anyways, if you're doing a print format and you want to print them all out, then you could just, you know, save them in a file box or something and maybe put names on there. But when it comes to the ancestry, I like to just collect everything, and it allows you to collect every document you research, and you can just pull it up there. So that's how I would pull up most of my information and save it. And I think the other site allows you to do that, Family Search. You can go on there and save documents too, so you can just go back and pull them up. I found that's the easiest, some of the easiest ways. But now if you have stuff in your family to preserve that a little better, I would definitely, you know, keep that in a file area, or if it's like newspaper clippings, try to laminate that or something so it doesn't deteriorate more, because like I have an old Bible from one of my grandmothers that I got from my dad, and I have that kept in like plastic because, you know, it, after the years go, it'll just start deteriorating, some of the pages do. Can you hear me?
I have another question.
Okay.
Where is the best place to get templates for the family?
Well, actually, I did have that one of my references, but actually you can just Google, and a bunch of, if you punch it in, just Google it, printable family search templates. A lot of that stuff will just start popping up where you can print them off, and you'll start seeing different sites. So a lot of the information you just start searching for it and punching it in. I did one, I can't remember where I got that, Simply Family Tree. I thought I put that on here. But how to make a family tree chart, Lucid Chart blog. Some of those I think had templates on them. You basically just have to punch that in and it will start coming up different templates. They're all over the web.
And then I know also you have some really great resources that you were drawing from. Are those pamphlets that you send out? Potential.
Well, we don't send them out, but they can look at the brochures online on our genealogy page. But when we do go and go to a lot of the cultural events or the cultural meetings, we will set up a table and have our brochures out for people to take. And then we also set up our table where we have genealogy request forms. So if people, there's two different forms. The genealogy request forms, they're for people that want to find their Choctaw heritage. And then we also have forms, what are those forms called? Dolls forms, the census card forms. So if you're already an established tribal member and you would like to know who your enrollee is or have your application packet or jacket, then we can print those off and send you more detailed information on your family.
Well, one last before we move on. How long does it take to do the simple, maybe 5-generation family tree? Like if I was going to sit down with my family tomorrow on a Sunday, maybe after church services, and I wanted to sit down with my supplies, how long do you think it would take to just create a simple family tree for us to have?
Well, it just depends on how fast you can collect that information. And how well you know where to look for the information. That might take some time because you want to make sure you are looking at the correct information, because some people, for instance, they might put their tree together on Ancestry and sometimes it could be wrong, and they see some other family member with their tree, so they add that to theirs and it's not their family. So you don't want to mess up there. You can easily mess up by just not doing your own research and just, what is that called, where they pull the information and add that into the tree on Ancestry. They can copy someone else's tree. So you're going to have to do a little bit of your own research and make sure all your sources are correct. And it could take about a week to do, or longer, because you just want to make sure it's accurate. Wouldn't you think? I think it would take some time, because you want all those resources matching up and you want everything to be correct. So it takes a time, it's a process, but in the end, you might stumble upon historic events or stories, and you can just kind of picture how these people lived back then. Some of my grandmothers had 14 kids. There's no way in today's ages I would have 14 kids. I don't know how they did it. So, you can look at their jobs, all kinds of stuff. But yeah, it's a lengthy process. But you do want to make sure that the information you're pulling and the sources you're pulling from are good sources, and what you're looking at is facts. So.
That's a good point. I think, oftentimes we hear things at family gatherings, and we need to be able to back that up with facts. And I'll share a perfect example before we move on to Alex. And so my grandmother, their side of the family immigrated in from Italy, and her whole life they lived, just outside of Chicago. So she thought she was born in Chicago. She, had her driver's license. It was mixed up. Her information for her retirement was always mixed up. She never had her birth certificate because she kept going to Cook County and Chicago looking for these records. Well, it turns out when they immigrated into Missouri, and that's where she was born. She was one of 13 children. And so in her mind, and everybody else's mind, Chicago was where their family was located, but she was actually one of the ones that was born in Missouri. And so that's where I was able to find her birth certificate after her death. And so it's kind of marrying up. I really like that you said that about those facts and those actual good sources, where those documents are, so that you have the accurate information. I think that's great advice. Well, thank you for joining us today, and thank you both from the genealogy department. You guys are essential to our tribal members and the work that we do in family history preservation, so big yokoki to you. I'm going to move on to Alex. So Gwen and Gloria, you're more than welcome to take off or stick around with us. We appreciate your time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandria Goff. I am the archivist at the Choctaw Cultural Center. And let me share my screen real quick and get that going for y'all. All right. Okay, can everyone see that? Hopefully so. Okay. So what we're going to be talking about today is archival preservation and just getting the fundamentals down. And so one thing that I want to point out and main objective for this presentation is some really easy ways that y'all can put into action some tools and tricks that will improve your family's collections, but also do so on a reasonable budget. And some of these archival supplies and the archival standards cost a lot of money. And so we're going to do some basic level things that are going to improve the family collection for people who are on a budget, essentially, which I myself am one of those people. So first of all, welcome to the archives. This is a view of a section of our vault, and this is our newspaper collection here. So you can see we've got our Choctaw Community News and our Biscayne newspapers, and they are housed in acid-free file folders, and they are also put in acid-free boxes, right? These are some of the fancy, expensive supplies, right? So today we're going to learn exactly what sort of things can be considered archival and that can be gathered together for your personal family archive or can potentially be donated to an archive like the Choctaw Cultural Center. And then we're going to talk about kind of what they should be stored in, how they should be stored, and then some specific types of materials that you may run across as you're trying to gather your family documents. Okay. So first of all, we're going to look at our kind of what are archives. And, you know, one thing that Gloria talked about was diaries, letters, family Bibles. All of these are great examples of family archives and documents. So most of those things are going to be paper things or books, but also think about your photo albums. And if you happen to have old maps, that is also part of archives as well. Something people don't always think about when they think about archives is sound and visual recording. So audio tapes, videotapes. And so here we have a variety of formats that you may find. So you might find vinyl records. You might find the reel-to-reels that are both sound or audio, sound or video, right? You might have cassette tapes of performances. My brother is a pianist, so he recorded a lot of his recitals on cassette tapes. And then we have VHS tapes. So again, also our family has a lot of VHS tapes. One thing to keep in mind with your home recordings, that these are for your personal recordings, right? So family events, like maybe you have a family reunion, maybe someone in your family had a video camera and videoed one of the Labor Day parades, right? That's all part of your family archive. You know, taping an episode of your favorite Law and Order is not going to be part of your family archive, right? So thinking about things that pertain directly to your family, and they can be on a variety of formats. And I could have even put even more like CDs, MP3s, MP4s, all the sorts of digital media as well, because this is one area of archives that is changing rapidly with the technology, right? So you kind of have to think a little bit outside the box, beyond those files, beyond those books, to kind of collectively gather your whole family archives. There are a couple of things, though, I want you to keep in mind that are not considered part of a family archive and would not be accepted for donation at any sort of archival institution. And these are things that relate to your personal finances or your personal identity, okay? So things like financial statements or tax records are not going to be considered archival. They are very important and you should keep those, but they are not, they shouldn't be shared with just everyone because you need to be able to protect your identity, right? And a lot of these things are, have your social security number on them or have your bank account information. And we don't want that information getting out and about in the world and causing, financial havoc for for yourself. One caveat to that is, let's say your great grandfather operated a general store in like Indian Territory, so early 1900s before statehood. And let's say you still have some of his ledgers, right? And it shows his accounts, it shows what products that people are buying, and it may have financial information in there, but that is considered historical financial information and is not related to your personal financial well-being at this point in time. And that's what we're talking about for things that are not archival. So the old historical financial records, that you should keep, because that documents a part of life in your family and in Indian Territory and the surrounding community. And that's really important. Other things to think about to also kind of protect yourself are medical records. Any sort of forms, any sort of lab results, anything that may show a diagnosis from your doctor. Those items should not be shared. That's your personal information. And you also, some of that information could be potentially embarrassing. That's kind of the low end of the scale of risk. But the higher end is that you have federal laws like the HIPAA laws that could be violated if those were shared. So we don't want to put yourself at risk. We don't want to put others at risk. And then lastly, you can see our lovely blue and grayish Social Security cards. And we all know to be very careful with this, and especially with the card itself. But be aware, especially for generations past, or even in my parents' generation, Social Security numbers were used in odd places. So they were used as driver's license numbers, they were used as student ID numbers in colleges and high schools. So just be aware as you're looking through things and gathering your documents that Social Security numbers could pop up in odd places. So just kind of keep your eyes peeled for that and make sure you're protected. So as you're looking around, you might be wondering where to look for your documents. So think broadly about where all of your family's materials may be, right? They could be in a garage, they could be in an attic, they could be in a damp basement somewhere, or they could also be on, let's say, your family's property that your family has had forever and ever and ever, and there's multiple outbuildings and sheds, and they're starting to fall down, and nobody's been in them for a long while. You should probably look at all of those locations, trying to find materials that you can collect and that will tell a larger story about your family, right? So you may search all these areas and you're like, great, I found them. You're like, what do I need to do? My first recommendation for you is to remove the items immediately from these locations. Mainly, these are not stable environments, right? They could be, especially if it's an outbuilding, it's not secure for others who may come in and take the materials. And for the other locations, they're not climate controlled, right? And documents, and especially photos, and definitely any sort of audiovisual material are very prone to damage with high humidity, with low humidity, with extreme temperatures, right? So you want to remove those items and just bring them inside to a climate controlled area first and foremost. And this image too, we're going to talk multiple things about this image because it is quite terrible, quite honestly. There are a lot of things going on in this picture, and one of them is that it is not a climate controlled storage unit, right? One good thing about this is that it would have limited exposure to light and windows, so things would not be fading, but there are, with still being exposed to the heat and the elements like that, you're going to have a lot of problems, especially with the records and that kind of lower right-hand corner, because those are very vulnerable to heat damage and warping, and it will destroy your records. So the other thing to be aware of are those humidity levels. Various items have very specific ranges of humidity that they should be kept in. And all that is, it can get really technical and it can get really kind of overwhelming. But one thing, the kind of the big takeaway I want you guys to leave here with is that if your documents or photos or family records are in a basement and it smells musty, that means it's too humid. And those documents are at risk for molding and mildewing, which will destroy them. Okay. If your documents or photos or any of your family items are in an attic, that's going to be hot and dry, and especially paper and photos, they're going to get really brittle and they could just break and start to degrade into, particles and then dust eventually, right? So just keeping them in a climate controlled environment is key. My recommendation is to find an interior closet. Typically, those in a home are going to be like a coat closet, a linen closet. They're areas that you don't access all the time, so there's not going to be a lot of light coming in. You're not going to have the door open all the time, so you're not going to have these extreme fluctuations in temperature. And it's going to be somewhere that's inside your house that's going to be climate controlled, right? So that's kind of a good go-to strategy for housing your documents within your own home. Going back to this picture, you can see here that they have stacked things willy-nilly. They are up to the ceiling in cardboard boxes. Please don't ever do this. Cardboard boxes are designed for a certain weight limit, and even if things are light and you stack them up to the ceiling, the weight compounds and it will start crushing boxes, which you can see in this image here. So it's better if you only stack things 2, maybe 3 items high if something is really light that goes on top. Otherwise, try to limit it to 2. That's kind of my best advice that I can give you for that. Cardboard boxes themselves are not the best housing environment you could put them in. Cardboard is very acidic, which can start to change the color of paper and photos, and it does a lot of other things to it. It's really just not the best environment for your family records, which I know are likely very precious to you. So one thing that you can do, because archival boxes are expensive, and if you do go that route, you just want to make sure you're looking for a box that is acid-free, okay? But if you want to go a little bit more accessible route, you can use a plastic bin, like a Rubbermaid tote. That plastic is inert and is not going to cause the amount of damage to your items like a cardboard box will, right? And I recommend that you get a clear plastic one. That way you can periodically just kind of pick up the box. You can look at it from all angles, make sure everything looks good, make sure no pests have gotten in there, and everything is looking good. You don't just want to put your documents away and then never look at them again. 1, you could lose them, you could forget where you put them, but 2, you never know when something weird is going to happen, like a leak in your ceiling, and you just want to be aware of what's going on with your documents so you can best protect them. Let's talk about specific things you can do with certain materials. So for books are actually pretty simple. You want to limit the light exposure like usual, and usually this is more of a concern with books because they're on bookshelves, and bookshelves can be anywhere in your house, and as the sun comes through your windows, you can shine right on your books, as they were doing with my Nancy Drew covers earlier this year, and I had to address that. When you are taking your books off your shelves, you want to make sure you're leaving enough space on your bookshelves so you can get your fingers in and you can grab the book on either side of the middle of the spine. You don't want to take your book and use a finger or 2 fingers and then tip it towards you off the shelf, because this is going to eventually damage the spine and it's going to wear away at your book unnecessarily, right? So just kind of grab it and pull it from the shelf like that. When you're reading books, please use bookmarks or scraps of paper rather than folding pages. Eventually those folds will weaken on the page and it will tear away. Right? And this book up here, this is one of my books, an old Ruth Fielding book from the early 19-teens. And if you have a book that's really precious to you that you want to hold on to for a long, long time, and it has a dust jacket, you can see here that this dust jacket is starting to chip away, it's wearing, it's kind of tearing. If it's a really valuable book to you, you can purchase Mylar dust jacket protectors. It's completely optional if you want to do this. I only do this for the books that I consider are the most precious, right? That you want to keep in the best position, in the best condition possible. The books are pretty simple. Paper gets a little bit more complex. So the first thing, we're looking at this bottom picture here of this rolled item. If you have any items that are rolled that you could possibly unroll, please do. Some items are very, very large. Like if you have a really long map, you're going to have to keep that rolled, but just make sure you're not rolling them tightly. Paper tends to form and stay in the position that it was in for a long time. And so in this picture, this is an item that was rolled for who knows how long. And now anytime you open it, it wants to snap back into that rolled shape, right? And so at this point with this item, it's going to need further conservation work to actually get it flattened. But if you have something that's just kind of curling, you can put a heavy book on it and kind of weigh it down and just let it decompress itself from there. Let's talk about this top picture. I have to say I am very embarrassed to even show you this picture, but I think it's important. This is a binder that is in my possession. This is my grandmother's genealogical research that she worked tirelessly on for many, many years. She was also a penny pincher and apparently did not believe in getting a new binder when this one was full. So she put everything she possibly could in here. Now that means in this binder, there's paper, there's photos, there are original documents, there's everything you could think of when you're doing genealogical research. But because it's in this binder, they're now starting to curl because of the position. And you can see that there's a lot of plastic in there. She used sheet protectors, which a lot of people want to do. And that's fine if your sheet protector is labeled as archivally safe or acid-free or photo safe, something like that. But these are not. So what happens with plastic as it ages is mainly two things. If you're really lucky, that plastic gets brittle and starts to just kind of flake off, right? If you're not lucky, that plastic gets sticky, and that stickiness will transfer to your documents and your photos, okay? So my recommendation is to remove all papers from binders, period. If they are photocopies of things that you don't mind and it's like a quick reference sort of thing, you can put it in a binder. If they are original documents, don't put it in a binder. Please don't. Instead, you can use just regular file folders that you can get from the store and just look on the box when you're purchasing them and they should say acid free. If they don't, choose another brand or type of folder, okay? That's going to keep your documents in a much better condition over a longer period of time. There's two things that I cannot emphasize enough. So please, please, please do not do. And the number one thing is do not laminate your items, please. Lamination is a process where you're essentially gluing a document in between two sheets of plastic. And that is irreversible. You cannot take out that document without damaging it beyond all recognition. And because the way the chemical properties of paper are, it's very strange, but the document will actually start to degrade inside that plastic, and eventually your information is going to disappear. So do not laminate your papers. And if you do have laminated items, take a photocopy them, and that way, in case something does happen, which it eventually will, then you have a copy and the information is saved. Okay? You also don't want to tape things together, because the same thing that happens with binders will happen with tape. And you want to avoid staples and paper clips, because they'll rust and weaken the paper where it oxidizes. So for photos are a lot trickier than paper. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, because I hope to come back and do a whole presentation about just photographs, because everyone has a lot of photos. So the number one thing for this is please identify your photos with people, place names, dates, events, that sort of thing. You can identify them on the back of the photo with a pencil. Just make sure you don't press hard and indent the photo. But you want to identify them, because in this bottom photo here, this is an item from one of our collections, and this is from the 1988 Labor Day Parade. And I don't know who any of these people are, and I'm kind of confused of what's happening on this float. And I don't know why this woman has a tinsel wig on. I don't know why she has a mannequin in front of her and a somewhat looking astronaut figure behind, but someone out there probably remembers this float and remembers having the best time with their really fun aunt, right? But if you don't label your photos, nobody else is going to know those stories. So not labeling leads to lost information. Okay. Again, you're going to want to look for acid-free things if you can. And you're going to want to scan as many photos as you possibly can, just so you can have a backup, just in case anything happens or your photos fade, right? Or if you want to put them on display, you can put the scanned copy and save the original so that the original stays in good shape. And then if you have any photo albums, I don't know if y'all can see that real well. This is a type of photo sleeve that was very popular in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And it's called magnetic pages. It takes a terrible noise. And it has a sheet of plastic and then adhesive. Whatever you do, please take your photos out of these albums right away, because these are particularly damaging to your items. And then our last category is the audio-visual area. With this, you want to digitize as much as you can, as fast as you can, just because things are rapidly changing in this audio-visual tech world, right? Again, you want to identify recordings as best you possibly can, and then save the originals and play the digitized version once it's been digitized, right? So, and with records, always store them vertically. The weight of them can actually crack your records and would not be playable anymore. And then one weird thing that you can do, but it's worth mentioning, if any of your audio visual, especially reel to reel, start smelling like vinegar, you're going to want to contact a conservator immediately. It means they're breaking down at a really rapid pace. So last but not least, I want to talk to you guys about contributing to your family archive. A lot of people think about the family archive as old documents, things from the past that we want to save and salvage. But we, right now, are creating information and data that can go into a family archive and be very helpful for future generations. And so one of the things that we often use every day and don't think about it are emails. Save your emails, especially correspondence with other family members or friends, and save those so that at a later date, you can go back and reflect on those and read them again and enjoy those conversations again, right? And your future children or grandchildren can read those conversations as well. everyone has, not everyone, but almost everyone has a smartphone now. And a lot of people who have smartphones take a lot of photos. Go ahead and organize and download your photos from your phone. Get them off of your phone, put them on the cloud, and start labeling them and identifying who's in them and where you took them and what you were doing, right? Again, this has been said before, talk to your family members, get as much information as you can. You want to record conversations if possible, write things down as you find out. It's going to help with your family tree. It's going to help with just creating connections with people. Because in the end, history is all about people, it's about community, it's about connections. And I don't want you to get kind of overwhelmed with the details of preserving things and then forget about the really neat stories that your family has to pass on for the future. So this is, that's kind of what I have prepared for you today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me now. But if you want to contact me later, you can contact me at agoff@Choctaw Nation or archives@choctawnation.com. And I would be more than happy to discuss, kind of personal situations of what's going on with your documents and, kind of troubleshoot things as best as possible.
That's awesome, Alex. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm just kind of a paper nerd, and I love to collect all of the documents, and so you had a wealth of information, and I've got some things that I need to take care of now listening to you, as I'm sure other people have too, right?
You saw my binder of shame. We all do. It's just a natural part of being human and getting busy with your daily lives, and you just don't, you put it on the back burner, and then you don't think about it until it's late in the game, and then you realize you got to do something.
Yes. Well, and one of my questions for you is, something personal that happened this year, and I had the pictures, old pictures, and it was kids' photos, and we had gone to an amusement park, and I just kind of threw them in a box, and they were in a plastic tub, a little kind of shoe plastic tub. And I noticed that there was like ants crawling in and out of the box. And when I opened them up, there was ants like destroying the photographs, and I couldn't figure out what they were attracted to. So what is that chemical on there that maybe, there was a little bit of, I guess, maybe moisture, but what was that they were attracted to?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think to really kind of diagnose that, we'd have to do some chemical analysis of what is actually going on, which is well beyond my scope of expertise. My guess would be that there's some sort of glue, some sort of adhesive, some sort of like starchiness in the paper that was really that they were really kind of attracted to. That's interesting. It's like you don't think of, you hope that insects are not going to find a way into your documents, but you end up realizing that where there's a will, there's a way, and insects are very wily creatures and can get into things, and they can get into them really quickly too, which is why, it is good to periodically just pick up that box, open it up, and kind of see what's going on just in case.
Well, and I had a follow-up question for you. So if there is something that has like a spot of mold on it, say it's a family Bible or something, and you get it and you're like, oh gosh, there's some mold on it. Is there a way to prevent that? Like, do you put it in the freezer? Do you just kind of put it in a Ziploc bag? What do you do with that if you see that?
Yeah, so sometimes there is evidence of mold that appears, and it is older. It was like an older infestation. So kind of the best way to approach it, in my opinion, is to isolate the item first and foremost. So if it's on a bookshelf with other books, just get it away from the other books, because it can mold has spores, so it can kind of float onto other things. And then I would say, if it's something you can put in a Ziploc bag, great. If it's a little bit bigger of an object, put it in a garbage bag and keep it in there until you can take the next step, which the next step sounds very strange, but you're going to vacuum the item. And
Okay.
You're going to set your vacuum on a really low setting, and you're going to want to change the bag immediately afterwards. You're going to want to do it outside if you can. Wear like a mask protection for yourself, and then put it in a garbage bag or Ziploc bag and just watch it. And if it seems like it's growing, then you're going to need to contact a conservator. If it's not and seems like everything's staying the same, then just keep an eye on it for a little bit longer, because I'm always suspicious of mold and mildew. So just keep an eye on it a little bit longer, and then it should be okay. But it's going to be something you're going to want to keep an eye on here on out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I think I have another. Okay. No, somebody was having trouble getting in, so I was making sure I was helping them too. So still working on the passwords and all of that, and different links out there, so people are asking. But well, thank you, Alex. You have given us a wealth of information, and I look forward to chatting with you more around the Cultural Center. I know that you're, always willing to help answer questions, and so I hope people reach out to Alex if you have any questions about your family documents or archives, or just even iffy questions. I've always found that Alex always answers my questions, so just shoot her an email, or maybe contact her by a phone, or get in touch with her. All right. Well, thank you, Alex. Our next participant is going to be our also works in collections, and so I will let you do your introductions, Maggie.
Halito. I am looking at sharing my screen and getting started.
Yes, it is coming on. Okay, great.
Okay. Can you see it? Because I can no longer see you all.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Halito. My name is Maggie Malone. I am the registrar for the Choctaw Cultural Center. My presentation today is Beyond the Archives, or Finding Clues to Family Research in Unexpected Places. By the end of this presentation, my hope is that you will find additional avenues for family research using objects. During a future presentation, I can share with you information and tips on how to preserve these objects, but today, let's delve beyond the archives. Art and crafted items, as well as items of significance, often enter museums and cultural center collections. If your family has donated objects, or if your relative is a skilled artisan, there is the potential that the person you are researching is mentioned either as the artist or in the provenance information. Many institutions are placing their collections online. Some of the information that you might find includes dates, alternate name spellings, affiliated people, clubs, location, and even activities in which your relative might have taken part. The left images on your screen show the online collections database for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. It includes items from the collections of the Choctaw Cultural Center, the Capitol Museum, Wheelock Academy, as well as some traditionally crafted Choctaw items found in other museums around the world, and it's known as Hinahanta. As you can see, one of the fields with the most information for this record is provenance narrative. It gives information on the makers of the basket, where and when it was commissioned, and by whom. So if you were researching Mae Wesley and only had her name, you now have a location, a date during which she was still living, and 2 affiliated people. If your relative was very influential, you might be able to find information on them in online collection databases for large larger institutions like the Smithsonian or the Field Museum. But quite often, you might need to first know a location where your relative lived. With that information, you can check to see if there are museums, cultural centers, or historical societies whose mission statements and collection plans allow them to collect that from that location or within that location. For example, the Choctaw Cultural Center collects items affiliated with the Choctaw people. While that does limit the scope of our collecting, it doesn't necessarily limit the places from which we might collect, since Choctaw people and items are found throughout the world. Another example might be regional museums and historical societies. You will find that their collection plan and mission statements limit them to collecting in, say, the state of Oklahoma, or the Panhandle Plains region, or even within a specific city, although sometimes collection efforts for these institutions overlap. So be sure to look multiple places. In the upper right of your screen, you should see a screen capture taken from a listing of entities using PastPerfect online. PastPerfect is one of the most popular collection management software programs, and if the institution has their collections online and uses PastPerfect, you can find them searching PastPerfect online collections. They have it organized by state, so you can find a specific collection within, say, the state of Oklahoma, as shown, or you can go to artifact search and search nearly 8 million collection records at once. If the museum, cultural center, historical society, or other entity you believe might have objects associated with your family does not have an online collections database, you can always contact them with questions. When you contact them, be sure to let them know the purpose of your research and be prepared to share with them any information you have collected. I am always very appreciative of researchers if they not only give me the name they are researching, but any alternate spellings, the birth and death date if known, when they might have lived in a certain area, any locations. And if they know of any affiliated people connected to the person that they are researching, as well as any clubs or activities in which they might have taken part, that information is also appreciated. And if they can provide a picture of what that person might have looked like, especially if they are researching a specific time in that person's life, that is amazing, because there are times that we may have group pictures from certain clubs or activities, but people might not have been individually listed. So a picture can potentially help narrow things down if you are delving into both objects and archives in the same research quest. Within museum collections, quilts are one of the most common objects that will have good information that researchers can readily use, particularly memory, friendship, autograph, and signature quilts. But information might also be gathered from crazy quilts. For ease, I am going to refer to quilts that were exchanged or created for the purpose of remembrance, and so might contain names, dates, and the like as friendship quilts. On these quilts, you might find names, dates, places, drawings, personal sentiments, and even phrases and poems from magazines. Armed with this information and a good web browser, you can open multiple avenues of research. You might wonder why you should search the phrases and poems written on the quilts. Well, a lot of effort has gone into digitizing newspapers and magazines from the past, and you might find that phrase or poem within these digitized collections, which can help you find a date if you don't already have one. If you are using design and construction methods to help you find a date, some of the oldest quilts include cross-stitch embroidery. Chain stitch and backstitch methods were used later, predominantly from the second half of the 19th century through the 1940s. If your quilt does not have decorative embroidery to create notations or designs, and instead uses ink, inked signatures and inscriptions are likely from the 1830s or onwards. As a side note, if your quilt has an inked signature that has not caused the quilt to deteriorate, it might actually be using Payson's indelible ink, which has been on the market since 1834. And as a side note, if you have ink or dye that is causing your textile to deteriorate, there really isn't a method of stopping that deterioration, but you can prevent it from accelerating by avoiding extremes in temperature and relative humidity. But speaking of ink, there have also been times when a quilt is unfinished and might still contain the piecing template created using newspapers or magazines, which might not only provide a date, but also insight into the reading habits and even political leanings of the maker or the maker's family based on the newspaper or magazine use. Batting might also be used to provide a date. For instance, if it's synthetic or natural fiber. There are also instances where older quilts have been used as batting. If that's the case, the fabric might be useful in providing a date. When using fabrics to date a quilt or confirm the date of a friendship quilt, remember to use the newest dated fabric from the original quilt. As most quilters know, fabrics are often passed down or even bought from estate sales. So the oldest fabric in a quilt does not necessarily mean that it was generated during the quilter's lifetime. But also remember that you don't want to date the fabric used for making repairs, since they will not necessarily confirm the date the quilt was created. As you see in the lower left corner, there are a couple of books that can help with fabric and dating. And while these books won't pinpoint the specific year, they can help give you a year range. We often use these within the collections world to help us give an idea of when something might have been created. As a further note on fabrics, prior to the 1830s, fabrics were expensive and were imported from England, France, and India. During the 1830s, American textile mills were producing a large quantity of affordable fabrics, but it was after the Civil War that an abundance of fabrics came on the market. Also, during the late 1800s and early 1900s, cigar and cigarette manufacturers included decorative silk ribbons and flannel patches in their product packages. These often depicted national flags from around the world or included Native American motifs such as feathers or teepees. So if these were integrated into the original design of the quilt, it might help date it in conjunction with other date indicators. The quilt you see before you, which is presented courtesy of my coworker Audrey Jacob, is a beautiful example of a friendship quilt. From it, you can find names, dates, and places. These places, which will link you to different churches and eventually to the presbytery, can potentially offer you additional information about your relation. Coincidentally, because I have a very inquisitive mind, when the online Past Perfect collection artifact search came up, I performed a mass search for the word Choctaw. Among the results, I came across a basket that was donated by Oscar Gardner, who you see is mentioned associated with the church in the lower right corner of your screen. Within the collection information, it indicated that Oscar Gardner was a pastor at the Goodland Presbyterian Indian School in Hugo, Oklahoma, which you can see detailed in the center right image. Knowing these two places has already expanded the search to potentially include church records and specific locations within Oklahoma. But the basket found within the online collection search was not found in the collections of an institution located in the state of Oklahoma. It is located in the museum associated with Western Kentucky University. So with this, you suddenly have expanded your search, creating even more avenues of research. Some other objects that might fuel your research may encompass commemorative memorabilia, including wedding favors, which often contain the wedding date as well as the couple's full names, prize ribbons, which might contain a date, event, and a person's name, letterman jackets, which might contain the graduation year, school information, medals, and pins. And if it's a letterman jacket from a university, you can always contact the Alumni Association because, boy, they are amazing at tracking down individuals and maintaining them on their mailing lists. Some other commemorative memorabilia are ornaments, which might commemorate the birth, the life, or even the death of a beloved family member. These are a small sampling of what might be considered commemorative memorabilia. Even t-shirts, like the one on the right side of your screen, is commemorative memorabilia. This t-shirt commemorating the class of 2000 is providing a similar function to signature quilts and even yearbooks. Because it's from the digital age, even if the name of the high school is not mentioned in any of the messages, there is the potential that you can use social media to narrow down where the shirt might have originated using the names shown in the signatures. The image of a computer's portrait booth was taken at the Choctaw Labor Day Festival, I believe in 1986, and shows you how easy it is to get commemorative items made, including t-shirts, calendars, wall art, and more. If it's a calendar, you will definitely be able to have an associated date, but if it's an image, you can always date it using the hairstyle or clothing worn. Identifying the people or getting them to admit that it was them in the image is another whole issue. Trophies. Trophies are a good resource to help link your relative to activities and clubs, and might also tie into schools, workplaces, events, and other organizations. Art and crafted items might display the name and date of the artist, but it might also tell the story of other family members and people. For instance, this sculpture, which has a concept designed by Sue Folsom and was created by the artist Janie Simple Umstead. It portrays two Choctaw cousins, relations of Sue Folsom. As part of the provenance we collected regarding this object, we know the names of the two girls as well as the story of this piece. If you find a work of art created by your relation, or if a piece of art seems to have features of your relation, that if they look similar, try reaching out to the artist. Perhaps they used your relation as a model and so can provide you with some additional information. In addition to art, crafted items like this cross-stitch design can sometimes help you piece together history and family relations. This piece was displayed in my grandparents' home and details the names and birth dates of all of the grandchildren. If the provenance of this piece wasn't known, even without the last names, a researcher could probably discover more about the family, as groups of descendants' names are often found within obituaries. Clubs and other social organizations like the Masons and sororities and fraternities many times have the tendency to produce objects that might not only allow you to associate an individual with a specific organization, but also where it was located, the years they participated, their level within the organization, and numerous other aspects. If it was an organization for which there were membership dues, there is the potential that you might be able to glean some information from them if the information is not restricted. When preserving objects, commemorative or otherwise, the packing material might tell us more than the object itself. Similar to newspapers and magazines used to create quilt patterns, we can learn about our relatives by looking at the packaging. Sometimes it might tell us about their nature, if it was packed meticulously, or it might just give some information into when the object was last handled, if it was wrapped in newspaper. If you are unpacking some books, be sure to look through the pages, as you might find some interesting bookmarks, as so many of us have a tendency to grab the nearest item to mark the page. In addition to surrounding treasured objects with packing materials, you might find clues around about relatives in some unexpected places. Within houses, especially those that have been in the family for an extensive period of time, you might find some treasures in attics and crawl spaces, but there might also be height marks on wall or door jambs, messages discovered below wallpaper, and even some interesting things might have been purposefully placed behind walls. Perhaps some items have even mistakenly fallen between cracks, crevices, or down radiator holes. By no means am I recommending you begin tearing off wallpaper or demolishing walls, but if you have a construction project planned, you might find some interesting items. Another out-of-the-way place you might find information is below butt plates and grips of firearms. Here too, I am not recommending that you disassemble or destroy anything in the hopes that you might find a clue about a relative. But it is in good shape. If it is in good shape, or if a professional can look at the piece, you might find some unexpected information, as with this butt plate on a reproduction rifle purchased for the exhibits within the Choctaw Cultural Center. It was made to look like a period piece, and during the styling, provenance information was left behind In my museum career, I've often been surprised at how many times someone's name has been scrawled onto an item, including a memorable experience of finding a name scrawled inside a fiddle. It was very odd. But anyway, anytime you find a name or date, you are one step closer to more information and maybe a breakthrough to a great family story. So, as you're gathering information and conducting research, what format works best for you? A Venn diagram, a detective's board, random scraps of paper organized just so? Whatever method you use, you will constantly need to use, verify, and validate the information obtained through objects with information gained from archival resources. As you research, be sure to record the source of the information gathered. When I was younger in particular, I often thought that I would remember where I got a piece of information. Experience has now taught me that it's faster to write down the source now rather than spending even more time looking it up later. If it's an internet resource, I also note the date accessed, because there have been several times when I have returned to a resource and the information has changed or even disappeared from the internet. And if somebody questions your research, by noting the source, you can show them where you got the information and help connect the dots together. So if you have researched an object, even if you are not able to find a lot of information, find a way to associate the information with the object. As Gloria was saying in her presentation and Alex in hers, making sure that you can associate the item with the information gathered is a vital step. Otherwise, it's just loose information, because that information not only helps you, but it may be of use or interest years from now. And if you ever decide to donate the object to a museum or cultural center, that information and your efforts will be cherished by the collections team. Now, I would love to attempt to answer any questions you might have for me. If this does go online, feel free, even at a later date, to contact me at email at mmalone@choctawnation.com or the collections team as a whole at collections@choctawnation.com.
Well, thank you, Maggie. That's really awesome for your presentation. And again, with everybody that's gone before, I've learned a lot. I don't have any questions for you just yet in the chat, but I was going to ask you a personal question about how to store heirlooms. So like if I got a basket or I had something that was a textiles, is it kind of the same that Alex was talking about? You know, should I keep it away from light? I've heard that about quilts, but baskets, natural materials, should they be kept from light? Should I keep them in a closet? Should I bring them back and forth? How does that work?
So anytime you have something that has dye on it, or any sort of pigmentation, even natural pigmentation, light will affect that pigmentation. It will cause it to fade, as we've seen with feathers and, you know, many natural items as well, because it penetrates down through that first layer. And unfortunately, once that color is gone, you can't bring it back. You would have to re-dye it. And in the case of feathers and the like, re-dyeing, you know, you're adding something that wasn't originally intended in the first place. With both archives and objects, many of the same things hold true. They are very temperamental to heat. You know, inappropriate temperature can cause damage. Inappropriate relative humidity, which you heard me mention in the midst of my talk, that's when moisture is either too high or too low. Too high, we often know that it can cause mold, mildew, that sort of thing. But if it's too low, it can actually embrittle items and make them more easily breakable, which can happen with your baskets. Going back to your ants. So here within any museum, we have an integrated pest management program. And with that, we try to do things that will prevent insects from coming in and eating our collections. But if something does come in through a crack or on somebody's clothes, one of the first things we do is identify it, because by identifying it, we can then know what it eats and why it was attracted in the first place. So in the case of your ants, if it was a grease ant, then it would have been attracted to a grease-like substance. If it was a sugar ant, or, you know, different things. So first knowing what it is a key. Any other questions?
Well, I don't have any more questions, and it looks like that our participants, they haven't dropped anything in the chat, and I apologize for that from you, but I know that some people had some hard time getting in with the password and then kind of dropping in and out, so maybe their internet connection. But I just want to say thank you. I've learned a lot from your presentation, especially about the quilts. That's something that Audrey and I had talked about before, so I learned a lot. And I actually Googled the book that you had in there about identifying some of those fabrics, because I think that that's really interesting. One of the things I was talking to an elder about really early on in doing some quilting research is, you know, the use of those flour sacks and recycled materials. And so she said that her family, you know, if they outgrew a dress, they would never throw anything away. They would, you know, put that into a quilt or make that a lining of some sort. And so I think it's really interesting you were talking about those multiple layers of history there behind that quilt. So I really appreciate your talk, and I hope that people reach out to you in the collections department to be able to ask you any questions that they have about the objects that we don't necessarily think is family history, but they certainly are. So thank you for being here today. Well, we'll go on to Seth here with Seth Fairchild with the Choctaw Foundation is going to give a presentation about some of the services and some of his experiences there. Seth, I'll turn it over to you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you yet.
Okay. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen here.
Okay, perfect. I'll let you know when I see it.
Let's see.
Yep, there it is.
Well, very cool. Well, just kind of want to walk you guys through a little bit about the Choctaw Foundation first, and a huge thank you to the speakers already. Been able to work with them, and I think really kind of what we're talking about will align a lot with what Maggie and Alex have already kind of spoken about. But just real briefly, the Choctaw Foundation is a 501c3 that works with the Choctaw Nation. Primary areas of education or areas of interest, here you can see over at the side, we have education, health programming, as well as what we call traditional programming. Primarily, our focus is education. We've awarded a little over $2 million in scholarships to Choctaw tribal members over the last few years, and those are donor-based scholarships and are open to Choctaws pursuing any type of post-secondary education. So any of the attendees or anybody that's listening who knows somebody who is attending or is interested in attending some type of higher education, please have them reach out to us. We may have some resources that we can help navigate them toward. Our wellness programming really stems around an edible schoolyard and a focus on providing elders with resources to put healthy food on their table. And so here you see a couple examples, couple pictures of where we've provided some raised beds at our elder assisted living facilities. And then we have at our Head Start and daycare, we have an edible schoolyard, which basically we set up and we teach kids how to plant food and to do all the things associated with eating healthy. So pretty great resource. And then the part that I kind of want to focus on today, which would be around the tradition piece. We, over the last 10 years, have worked to collect a number of artifacts and pieces that will be stored and housed here at the Cultural Center. So we've been working with Katie, Maggie, and Alex on that, and they are world class, and so that's just fantastic to work with them on this project. So kind of just as a general overview, that's sort of what we do as a nonprofit. And the part that I want to focus on is our elder recording project. It became obvious about 10 years ago, I think for us, that we would sit down through our work, and we would sit down with elders, and those that were 70, 80, 90 years old had just incredible stories. They had lived through periods in history that were, really monumental, not only for the country, but for our tribe. And so what we decided to do is that we would start sitting down with these elders and recording their stories. And we've had the opportunity to sit down with many, and I wanted to show you guys, we have a Vimeo page here, which this is not representative of all of our recordings, but some of them are located on here. Over 10 years, we've been able to record close to 80 different elders. And we kind of focused it in two different areas. The first one was topic specific, meaning there were certain topics that we thought we only have a certain period of time to record elders on these specific topics that would have firsthand experience. So the first one we did was around residential and boarding schools. And so we sat down with probably a dozen or so of Wheelock boarding school alumni and just sat down and recorded their stories. And what we do that is a little bit unique, and you can see here in this picture where these elders are being recorded, what's pretty unique is we actually aren't doing the interviewing. What we do is we sit alongside the families, we sit down with them and kind of talk with them about what they would like to have recorded. And then we set up the cameras, the microphones, and then we let the families just talk to one another. And I have seen just some amazing conversations come out of that. Because I think anybody can imagine if somebody just walks up to you and sticks a microphone in your face, you may not be the most receptive to talking about certain things. And so when we sit down with the families, we tell them, we just want you guys to visit. And at the end of it, if you don't want us to share this with anybody, we won't. We'll just give your family a copy of it. Sometimes the families will speak only in Choctaw. But a lot of times these conversations will start out heading one direction, and then sometimes they'll end up talking about some things. I'm looking at Eugene Uri here, who was a veteran, and yeah, he ended up really talking through some hard things with his family, and his family was so thankful. Eugene passed away a couple months after recording this, and what we do is if someone has passed away that we've recorded, we make several copies of the recording and send it to their families so that they will always have that copy. And we always want to be so respectful of this. So a couple of them here, and I thought if everyone is good with it, I thought I might just play a short sample of kind of how we set things up. The first one I wanted to show is Ruth Fraser McMillan. Her father was an original co-talker, Tobias Fraser, and Ruth also has passed away. She passed away a few years after this recording, but to think that her voice will live on and that her story will live on is pretty amazing. So I have just a short little clip here that I wanted to play for you guys.
Okay. Well, he was the oldest, grandma's oldest child. She had 5 children.
And what were his parents' names?
Susan and Reason. And his grandfather was Robert. See, I should put all this down before I start talking about it, because I know it and I can't think of it right now. But anyway, people were pretty close knit then, and the reason that I knew that Papa had been to war was because he had a wound. He was wounded, and he had a big wound on his leg. And I'd say, Papa, does that hurt? Did that hurt? He said, I hurt worse playing football. That's what he'd always tell me. It didn't hurt. Like, no, didn't hurt. And I said, well, what did you think? Leaving down here, it was such a small little place. It was way in the boondocks down there, And he took a train all the way to the East Coast, and he said it was just the wonder of big eyes and looking at things that he had never seen before. That was the thing. I didn't ask him if he got seasick because his daughter gets seasick, and I just wondered if he did. I wish I would ask him. And he said that he talked about the French people when he got there, how wonderful they received him. They were curious about his hair. They thought it was going to be curly, and they wanted to touch his hair, and he had to take his cap off and let him see it straight, straight. And but he said the people were just wonderful. But France was being badly beaten at that time, and so they were really happy to have somebody coming to help them. And when he didn't talk about actual experiences, except he did say when he was shot and the sniper killed the one that shot him, it was a woman. And later on, I had a copy of the Stars and Stripes where it talked about the women that were fighting in the war too, with the men, along with the men. So at first I thought women fighting then, but they did. it was in the newspaper, so I guess it was a fact. Well, he saw anyway what he saw, and he was very proud of his war experiences. He really was. He never talked about talking. He talked about the war and the ship and and I read later when they didn't. Well, I'll start. I talked to General, not Bridget General. Well, he was the head of the Historical Society for Texas, and he said that when they came down there, that's where they sent Papa to train them to go to war. They talked about them. They're short. They've got little feet. They can't do this and they can't do that. And he said they excelled in everything. They persevered and hardy, because that's the way they live. It's hard. And he said that they just were exceptional soldiers. And I was really proud, because when I went to the museum, he took me all through and had an aide helping me and gave me a lot of literature and everything. I even saw one of the original patches that they didn't have even a patch on them, and they had to make them out of just a piece of wool, and it was just a homemade thing and tacked on, because one of the generals thought that it was bad they didn't have patches, but they do have one in the museum in Texas. So I was thrilled to get to see that.
So pretty incredible to be able to hear that story. And I remember sitting with her that day, and it's so incredible. I think one of the most important things about these stories is getting those first or second hand accounts. I always give the example that my grandmother was in residential school, and I can tell stories of her to my children. But to imagine if we had a video of her telling those stories, I think would be just as incredible. So this is an example of sort of a topic specific story that recorded. But one of the things we also found was that sometimes the most eye-opening and enlightening stories were when we just sat down to record a Choctaw elder and just asked them about their experiences in life. And there were times that we could get very interesting stories, things that we may not have expected to get. And I have a short one here. We recorded, actually, he's our chaplain for the tribe, Olin Williams, and we were just having a general recording session with him, and he told a very interesting story about hearing Martin Luther King Jr. for the first time when he was a young boy on the reservation. And I want to play that for you. Deanna, are you guys able to hear that audio okay?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to hit play on this.
At the time, when I was growing up, there was a lot of racial tension, especially in the South. And as a little boy, I didn't understand anything that was happening with my life. I just felt the effects from the social concerns at that time period. And I didn't have a role model. I didn't have anybody that I could look up to that may have a doorway to my questions, something that I could look to. And then at that time, the technology wasn't as high as it is today. So only access we had was the radio. And we heard this man speaking, and he was speaking about injustice, and that kind of hit me, because that seemed to be what we were facing, and we were not prepared. We didn't know how to handle it. And so I listened to him, and he made sense. And I felt like he was somebody that I could relate with, somebody that could help me understand even a little bit about the social struggle at that time. So I had to make a decision I understood that he was not a Choctaw, and yet the principal thing that he was bringing was common to Choctaws too. And so I learned early that the struggle was not the outside, but it was within man, and that's what he was talking about. And so, with my childish understanding, I began to relate. I began to be educated by what he was saying, and so I think he made a big impact on my thinking process.
So another example of just really an incredible story, an incredible experience from his life that we were able to sit down, and even though we weren't intending for that conversation to go there, it just naturally went there. And so we see that a lot of times, in particular with our interviews where we have families doing the interviews. A lot of times it will just be families sharing stories with families, and we end up having some really good results from that. So I think the third thing I want to talk about was just the need for as many people as possible to sit down with their families and to record. We have, let's see, I want to try to stop sharing my screen and maybe turn on my camera here if I can get that to work. Can you guys see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, the third thing would just be encouraging everyone to sit down with their families and record. Like I said earlier, over about a decade, we've been able to record close to 80 different elders on a number of different topics. But you think about, especially with our tribe being the third largest in the U.S., a little over 200,000 tribal members, and especially with a lot of those being in that 70, 80, 90-year range, we would love to be able to record all of them, but to do that, it's going to take a lot of help. And so we have worked with youth groups. I'll give you an example. We worked with the Youth Advisory Board this past year to teach them how to ask questions, how to set up their phones, which especially a lot of those younger generations are very good already with recording, with cameras, with audio and all those pieces. But one of the stories in particular, I remember a young lady, she talked about going to her dad who was not in good health. He had been diagnosed with cancer, and she wanted to record him. And at first he said no. And he was a veteran, he was military, and then he came to her and he said, yes, I actually would like to do this. And she said the evening that they did that, he put on his full uniform and everything and sat down and talked to his daughter for a little while. And that's just one of those incredible stories, because you think about that, not only does that record the history of a Choctaw, but it is something that that family will be able to have forever. And we always talk about, if we could go back 200 years ago and listen to our elders talking about our customs, our traditions, our songs, our dances, all those things, and to be able to look at those today, it would be incredible. And people 200 years in the future will be saying the same thing about us. If I wish they had recorded these stories. And so we always talk about it in terms of crowdsourcing. If we're able to work with individuals over the holidays in particular, when families come together to sit down, to be able to just hit the record button on your iPhone and record those stories, they will be so valuable to the family. And if you have anybody in your family who is real knowledgeable about certain things like basketry, beadwork, and those things, that's wonderful. And being able to sit down and record those can be priceless. And if it's just the story of your family, that can be just as valuable as well. So just want to encourage that. And we do have sample questions that we could send out to everybody. I can get those to Deanna just to get the conversation started, and would love to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Well, thank you, Seth. That's a really awesome presentation. I really like learning about all of the things that you guys did, because I didn't realize that with the foundation, they did a lot of the healthy initiatives too for the Head Start and the growing vegetables and kind of helping, from a very early age, helping children establish that relationship with the land and kind of maintain that and healthy habits. So that's really good. And, what I was really impressed with the videos is, oftentimes I think that that's a scary thing, right? Is that, we're going to start interviewing or we're going to start asking questions and we don't know how it's going to go, or maybe they won't say anything. And what we saw in the videos, especially the first one, is that it just kind of starts tumbling out very naturally. And I think that that's the kind of beauty of it, is just having a conversation. And so I think the method that you guys use of having a family member, right, somebody that they're very comfortable with, I think is a really great plan. I know that we had some interviews with a special individual that's been very instrumental in historic preservation for helping us, is Tom Colvin, basket maker from Louisiana. And us ladies all kind of sat down and asked him questions and got him talking and things like that. And he shared some very personal things for us, but that's priceless. We were just very grateful for your help in doing that. And so for all of you listening today, I hope that you take Seth up on that and contact the foundation and really get some information about services and any tips and stuff. And of course, the documents he's going to share. So thank you, Seth, for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, and that rolls right into our last presentation for the day, which is Megan Baker. She's one of our own in historic preservation, and she's going to be sharing a little bit about, preserving family history, and it goes right in line with some of these oral history techniques. Of course, with COVID, we've had to be very, very careful with our family members and social distancing, and so, she was very brilliant, as she always is, in coming up with a form and a questionnaire. And so I think she's going to go into a little bit of that and some of her experience and about what kind of questions do you ask. I'll turn it over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Deanna Halito, Sahochifua, Megan Baker. And so I'm Megan. I'm a research associate in the Historic Preservation Department. I'm trying to share. Hold on. I'm going to pull up my presentation for you guys. Here we go. Screen one. Oh, chaos. Sorry. All right. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about thinking about our Choctaw family histories as parts of history, and how they're really hit all these kind of critical points in history. And sometimes we think our family history isn't that kind of interesting, or like the things that everyday things that we do are just like parts of everyday life, but sometimes we make history in those kinds of everyday moments. So I'm kind of like coming from this in addition to working for Choctaw Historic Preservation, I've been working on a dissertation about Choctaws and land ownership. But one of the things that I've always wanted to do was just kind of why I even went to get a PhD, was because I was like, I just want to hang out with Choctaw people and learn our stories and kind of all of that. And so from that, learning a kind of broad Choctaw history, I've learned a lot about my own kind of family history. So it's kind of a bit of an inverse from what everyone's been learning today. Is everyone started with family history and then they learned a little bit more about Choctaw history. Whereas I'm much more of a historian trying to figure out the grand narrative of Choctaw history and then finding parts of my family in those histories along the way. And so I kind of wanted to share a little bit about that journey with you all. So I wanted kind of want us to all think about our family members as these integral kinds of parts of Choctaw history, and we can see the kinds of things that they've done over their lifetimes to make sure that Choctaw Nation existed today in the present as we kind of are. They are the people who kind of practiced our culture throughout the years and maintained all of that for our current generation, right? And so from there, our current generation, so people like us and Deanna and everyone who's presented today, we're kind of helping to save that for the later generations. So here you have a picture of some Choctaws outside of a church in Ruth. And then there's also a picture of me and my Aunt Rose, who is a Choctaw basket maker. If you guys go to the village during Labor Day, she's usually there kind of showing how to make Choctaw baskets. And so she was always to me just like my Aunt Rose, who lived in Oklahoma City. And when my Uncle Cleland was alive, he was just Uncle Cleland. But as I started doing interviews with people and talking about how our culture was kind of preserved throughout the 1900s, so there was throughout the 1900s, so the 50s, 60s, 70s, kind of that time period, I was learning that they were actually these really important figures, making sure that people went to Choctaw churches and did all of that kind of stuff. And so one of the big things that happens in the 20th century is the Choctaw termination. And so if you guys haven't heard of that, I'll just kind of give a quick overview. So you had Choctaw termination. So this was basically to kind of get rid of Choctaw Nation as a kind of tribe. When we came over here from the Trail of Tears in like the 1830s, we came as a full kind of government and created all these different kinds of institutions. We had like a legislature, courts, a chief, and so all of that kind of stuff. But then over time, that kind of gets chipped away, and then eventually the kind of seat of Oklahoma gets established. And so a lot of people kind of think that Choctaw government went away completely after statehood, but that was really not the case. And so what I was trying to show is how Choctaw Nation kind of maintained itself throughout the post-statehood period. And so termination would have kind of gotten rid of that really small Choctaw government that we had, which kind of still existed despite. So there was legislation that said that Choctaws were supposed to be, government was gone, but that was not the case. So they still had a small kind of government, and they were kind of just settling the affairs of the Choctaws. And so in the kind of early 1900s, that was because they had to sell all of the coal lands. If you guys didn't know, Choctaw Nation had a lot of coal and asphalt lands that were really valuable, and so the U.S. government couldn't allot the lands of that, and so they kind of had to sell that in bulk. And so the Choctaw government, the really small one that kind of remained, they were in charge of making sure that kind of got sold. And then once that would get sold, it would kind of be split up to all of the different Choctaw members, and so they would get money for that. And so that Choctaw kind of government in the early 1900s was around for that. And so throughout the 30s, you have the Great Depression. And so there were a lot of Choctaws who didn't have money and they were really poor. They lived in kind of really rural places. I think now we know that southeastern Oklahoma is pretty rural, but it was even worse kind of back then with no interstates or kind of roads or all that kind of stuff. So it was really hard for people to kind of travel and all of that. And so life was really difficult in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. And so people were like, they had wanted the money, and the US government was kind of taking too long to sell their coal lands. And so they were like, we want the US government to stop kind of taking care of our affairs. And so we want to be kind of more in charge of our stuff. And so they went to they told that to Carl Albert, who was our representative at the time on the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so they're like, oh, okay, we can do that. But they kind of misinterpreted what Choctaws wanted, and they wanted to actually just get rid of them as a tribe altogether. And if you guys know, tribes have a certain status, there's a nation-to-nation relationship. And because they wanted to terminate that nation-to-nation relationship, they wouldn't have the same kind of rights as they do now. But anyway, so Congress thought it would be a better idea to kind of terminate them. And so that's kind of why they did that. And so throughout this time, so that's kind of in the early 60s that's kind of going on, but then people start kind to hear about the termination, a lot of Choctaw kind of community members. And so that's when they start kind of like really organizing, and they're like, wait, this is actually a really bad idea if we kind of get rid of our government, because then we won't be able to have certain kinds of rights, like access to special programs, right? In the 50s, there was a loan program that was available for tribes. And so at that time, Choctaws weren't able to kind of participate in it. And so they wanted to be able to participate in that. And so they realized if we don't exist as a tribe, then we can't take part in that. And so they're like, okay, termination is a really bad idea. We shouldn't kind of do it. And so they really worked as a community to kind of stop that from happening. And so if you guys have ever heard of the Hello Choctaw newsletter, that's one of the kinds of sources that it was a newsletter that Choctaw community members sent to each other. They kind of distributed to everyone, kind of telling them, hey, this is going on. Everyone should be paying attention to this. Terminations, like, this is what's going to happen. It's really bad for us as a people. And so we need to like really organize against that. We need to like write letters to our Oklahoma congressional delegates. We need to write to Chief Belvin. We need to write to the president. And so people were getting really kind of amped up and organizing against it. And so so there was this newsletter who would kind of circulate the information about that and let them know who to kind of reach out to. And so so people are doing these, they're kind of like writing letters like this one from Mrs. Leon Holm. And so so I go through the archives, and these are the kinds of things that I've come across. And I've seen so many of these kinds of letters from Choctaws, just like everyday kinds of families, writing and organizing and getting things to happen for Choctaw people. So, and as I was kind of going through these, I was like, I know these names. Like, I've heard these names, and they're like from Baptiste, they're from Broken Bow, they're from Talihina, and these are kind of the places and towns that I know best, because that's kind of where my dad grew up, and that's where I would spend all my kind of time when I would come to Oklahoma as a kid. And so I thought these were really great kind of ways of showing how our family members, even though was doing these kinds of things, and we might not have kind of realized it. Like, people were really kind of active in our kind of politics throughout the like 60s and 70s. And so all this kind of is to say each kind of individual who does this was a major part of making sure that termination didn't happen. And so that we could stay as a nation. And so I think these are really great kind of documents that show us this. And so another one, and this one's a little bit more personal, our families did a lot to change the course of history. So I just happened to be in the archive one day going through all of this termination documents. And so I kind of came across this one, and I was like, oh, like, I know these kinds of places. And so towards the bottom in the middle, I actually kind of found, it says Aaron Baker, Baptiste, Oklahoma, Juanita Baker, Baptiste, Oklahoma. So that's actually my grandparents. And so I never really kind of expected to find something kind of like this. But it was really cool to me to see, like, oh, you know, here's my grandmother signing for my grandfather, because I could recognize the handwriting. I was like, oh, like, there we are in history in these kinds of documents. And so I think that was a really cool thing. And so, you know, like, I saw Tonica, and I was like, oh, I know all these kinds of families. And so it's really great to see how kind of like really involved they were. And so I could, from looking at these documents, they could really help me see how Choctaw churches were really important sites of our kind of grassroots organizing against these kinds of things. So, for instance, like, here's a picture of my grandmother. She passed away when I was probably like 10 or 11 or something, and I have all these fond memories of her. Like, I remember that lawn chair very distinctly. And she was a member of Bethel Hill, and my dad always told me these stories of how, you know, the church burned down once, and because she got like a first grade education and she knew some English, so she was like better suited at than most other kinds of Choctaws because she knew a little bit of English and could write letters. And so she kind of took a secretary role. And so she was a kind of person who was like writing letters to people to help get things done. So she like wrote letters to the church organization to rebuild the church. And so she kind of did all of these different kinds of things. And so then when I saw her letter or her signature kind of on the petition, I was like, oh, it kind of really makes sense that grandma was the one who was like knew about this and was kind of really involved. And so I could kind of like situate her in this like really big movement in history and for Choctaw people. And like it's really cool to me that my grandmother is like the daughter of Simon Billy, who was a preacher at Okeechobee Church in Broken Bow. And if you know anything about Choctaw language history, that is one of the kinds of churches that Cyrus Byrington used to visit when he was alive. And so she's kind of so connected to those kinds of histories. And so that was also kind of a really cool thing for me to kind of learn and know about. And so spending time in these kinds of, with these archival kinds of documents and doing my research on history has been really great. And it's also like really nice to kind of like find people that or I know Maggie was looking at photos, finds all these photos of people, and she's like, I don't know who these people are because they're not kind of like documented. And so it'll be kind of nice where I'll just like so like I came across this photo in an old Bureau of Indian Affairs reports about like economics. And so I was just texted my cousin this picture, and then she's like, oh, here you go. And then she gave me a little bit about her own kind of history. She's like wanted to be major as an extension agent. And so at this time, this kind of program was being implemented to improve the economic conditions for Choctaws living in McCurtain County and kind of this area. And so it was interesting to see that she had made this like big life change because of this bigger funding kind of change that was also kind of happening across the Bureau of Indian Affairs at that time. And so it's like kind of really cool to see the ways that these big decisions and that happen elsewhere come to really affect our own everyday lives. And so all of this is kind of really to say it's important to kind of remember that like each of us are a part of history constantly. And so that's kind of why it's so important, as people have mentioned before, especially Seth, why we should kind of like talk with our families and do kinds of oral histories. And so I would definitely use the Choctaw Foundation's kind of resources if you can. But if you're maybe a little bit more distant, this is something that I kind of created back when COVID started and we were all at home kind of bored, being like, what should we do? I was like, well, if you're just like hanging out with your immediate family, you can do the kinds of oral histories and learning about the things that have happened in people's lives that are kind of cool that we might not think are important now, but later on we'll be like, oh, this is a really great kind of thing to have learned. So if you go back to the June Itifabasa, which is in the Biskinik, you can just look that up online. You'll find this kind of guide that I kind of created, which has kinds of questions that you can ask. And it has some tips on like what you can do with how to do interviews and kind of all of that. So you can always see that as a kind of resource. And then you'll kind of have all of that for your family, and then you can save that. And then maybe you could also like write a dissertation from your family's kind of materials or something like that. I think that would be really cool. So yeah, that's pretty much all that I kind of wanted to share today. And so if you have any questions, there's my email. And yeah, that's it.
Well,
Thank you, Megan. We're so appreciative of your work and your passion here in historic preservation, and I enjoyed your presentation as well. One of the things that I think is great about what you were talking about is that sometimes, you know, we don't give ourselves permission to go and find those little nuggets. You know, sometimes we might be researching something else or just going to the library or going to an archives. They're free. It's not like you have to pay. Sometimes you have to make a special appointment if you want to see different records, but you know, just to go and dive in. I think one of the most recent in the last couple of years that I had was going to the archives in Fort Worth, and I didn't realize that, you know, you could go in if you're a family member of a boarding school, you know, student. And so I went in, and as I was reading through some of the letters and some of the student records of, you know, an ancestor, you know, I could relate to them. I could, you know, the way that they were talking about how they had their, you know, stockings kind of mismatch and that they were going to try to do better. I was like, oh, that's me, you know. And so that's what really came through when you were talking, is that, you know, there's an emotional component, there's a spiritual component. You know, you're really able to connect with those ancestors in the past when you see their name in print, when you see their handwriting. Gosh, you know, one of them had wrote a poem and it was in their handwriting, and I just got so giddy knowing that that was theirs, you know, and it was celebrating them. And so thank you so much for being here, Megan, and thank you for being our technical advisor on scene. You didn't see how much she was running around, but just take it that she was very instrumental in helping this go really smoothly today. So I appreciate your help, Megan. And so there's no questions I have, and we're kind of getting to the end time today. So again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us at Historic Preservation or any of the other programs that were featured here today. We really hope that we're able to have this in person. In the meantime, if you have any family history, if you have any preservation needs, questions, concerns, you just want to pick our brains, please hit us up and you know, let us know. And we appreciate, and a big yakaki to all of the participants today.